Hi everyone, welcome to our webinar today. The topic for today's webinar is Electricity Affordability Metrics for the U.S. This webinar is being presented by the Clean Energy States Alliance, also known as CESA, and it's being presented for our Sustainable Solar Education Project. And our host for this webinar is Nate Hausman. Nate is a project director here at CESA, and we have some excellent guest speakers on the line with us today. Before I pass it over to them, I'd like to go over a few very quick housekeeping notes. First of all, to join the audio portion of the webinar, hopefully you've already figured that out if you can hear me, but you do have a couple of options. You can join using your computer, mic, and speakers, or you can connect using your telephone. If you'd like to minimize the webinar console so that you can view the presentation full screen, you can click on the little orange arrow that you see circled here. A very important note to submit questions throughout the webinar. We encourage you to do that. Please type them in to the question box on the webinar console and hit send. We will be saving about 15 minutes for Q&A at the end of the webinar presentation, and we'll get to as many questions as we can. We are expecting to have a lot of people on the line today, so that does mean we'll probably get a lot of questions. And to make sure that we get to your question, type it in when you think of it, and don't wait until the very end of the webinar to send in your questions. And a final note, this webinar is being recorded. We will be posting the recording on our website at cesa.org/webinars, and we'll also send you an email probably this afternoon with a link to the webinar recording, a copy of the slides, and also a link to find the tool that is being highlighted in today's webinar. So with the housekeeping out of the way, I'd like to pass it over to our host for this webinar, Nate Hausman. Like I said, Nate is a project director here at CESA.
Great, thank you, Samantha. As Sam said, today we're going to be sharing information on electricity affordability metrics for the United States. But before we get into the content and hear from our speakers, I just want to tell you a little bit about who CESA is and why we're doing this webinar. So the Clean Energy States Alliance, or CESA as we often say, is a national nonprofit network of public agencies and organizations. We work together to advance clean energy. CESA is made up of mostly state agencies, and you can see our membership on this slide. So this webinar is being conducted as part of our Sustainable Solar Education Project. That's a CESA-run project to help state and municipal officials ensure that distributed solar remains consumer-friendly and benefits low and moderate income households. The project as a whole is funded through the Department of Energy's Solar Energy Technologies Office. And through the Sustainable Solar Education Project, we've developed a bunch of resources. They're designed for state and municipal officials, and they're on topics related to the focuses of the project: solar consumer protection and solar equitability. We've got a series of guides on your screen. You can see 6 guides we produced on these topics. We do webinars like this one, and you can on CESA's webpage you can find archived webinars. We produce a free monthly newsletter that covers activities and resources and news from around the country on solar equitability and consumer protection. And you can actually sign up on the project page on your screen here too. And we also do some in-person workshops. We've done a series of 3 in-person workshops. Next. So as I mentioned, today's webinar is focused on electricity affordability metrics for the U.S. The electricity affordability metrics mapping tool that will be presented today was developed through the U.S. Department of Energy's Grid Modernization Lab Consortium. Monisha Shah of the National Renewable Energy Lab will briefly tell you about the Grid Modernization Lab Consortium and its work to measure the progress of the nation's grid modernization efforts. Then Dave Dave Anderson of the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory will explain the electricity affordability concept and go from there. So to keep things moving, I'm going to introduce both Monisha and Dave now, and then I'll turn it over to them, and we'll set aside some time for Q&A, as Sam said, at the end of the webinar. So Monisha Shah is a senior energy analyst in the Strategic Energy Analysis Center at the National Renewable Energy Lab, and she has 17 years of experience with renewable energy analysis, program design, and technical assistance. Her role in the Grid Modernization Lab's Consortium metrics analysis projects builds on many years of working with the electricity industry and policymakers on smart grid and utility data access efforts, in her time leading both the Better Building Energy Data Accelerator and the Green Button Initiative while at the White House Council on Environmental Quality. She has an MSE in Environmental Engineering from Johns Hopkins University and a BS in Economics and a BSE in Chemical Engineering from the University of Iowa. Dave Anderson is a senior research economist and energy economist team lead at the Pacific Northwest National Lab, or PNNL, in Richland, Washington. His over 23-year career at PNNL has led or contributed to studies in areas of socioeconomics, energy efficiency, nuclear power licensing, macroeconomics and employment impacts, energy technology impacts, and several economic topics in the environmental space. He has over 75 peer-reviewed report or journal publications, and Dave holds an MS in forest economics from the Oregon State University. So with that, we'll pass over screen control to you, Dave, and I'll let you have the floor, Monisha.
Great. Well, thank you, Nate and Sam. This is a great opportunity for us to talk about this really great seminal work that Dave has been leading for this project. And as Nate and Sam mentioned, my name is Monisha Shah, and I work with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory in our Washington, D.C. office. And I've been leading stakeholder engagement for this grid modernization metrics analysis project. So maybe we'll go to the next slide. And the Grid Modernization Lab Consortium is a strategic partnership between Department of Energy and 13 national laboratories, which was designed and set up in support of Department of Energy's Grid Modernization Initiative, which was launched in, I think, 2016. And so it's an opportunity to bring together leading experts and resources from the national labs to help achieve our nation's grid modernization goals. And so the Grid Modernization Lab Consortium consists of a number of different topics. There's researchers at labs working on grid architecture, interoperability, grid sensing and measurement services, grid services, and technical evaluation, as well as this metrics analysis project. And so the metrics analysis project is an effort which is cross-cutting in nature and looks across all different types of technologies and across the various R&D efforts to create and assess the current state of metrics in these 6 areas of reliability, resilience, flexibility, sustainability, affordability, and security, so that we can measure progress on grid modernization in the country. And so the nine national laboratories which have been working on this project, and they're each of the 6 areas is being led by one of the national laboratories. And so each of the teams for the 6 areas have basically created a landscape of current metrics, conducted gap analyses to figure out, with stakeholder engagement, which areas of technical analysis would be of most value. And then the teams have been developing methodologies for the different 6 areas in the areas of highest priority based on that gap analysis. And then been in the process of testing out those metric methodologies with test beds and partners, either with publicly available data or in some cases data that's been made available by some of those partners. And then, another large component of this effort is to try to figure out how to institutionalize some of the metrics and incorporate them into data collection agencies such as Energy Information Administration is one example, or other agencies that collect data. So that's sort of the overarching objective of the project. And we've also had stakeholder engagement efforts, which I've been helping to lead, where we're working to try to identify subject matter experts in each of the 6 areas to make sure that we're not duplicating efforts, and also leveraging the best-in-class data and analysis which is available in the marketplace. We've also been working with various potential users of the metrics, so decision makers in the utility industry, to figure out how they might use these metrics in their decision-making processes, whether it's regulatory in nature or legislative processes, or within a business process at a private sector organization. And then we've also been working with various organizations that might collect and publish these metrics in terms of data to figure out what would be useful for them, and kind of putting this on their horizon, as those types of survey instruments and data collection efforts do take time to develop. So as a part of this effort, we want to do a deep dive into the affordability space, and my colleague Dave Anderson is going to talk about the work that he's done to try to identify metrics in the affordability space, and then develop them, test them out with publicly available data, as well as working with certain partners. And we would love to get your feedback on the metrics that he's developed, and ideas and concepts on how those metrics could be used in decision-making processes, as well as folks that might be interested in also testing out the methodologies, with your own data and in your own kind of jurisdiction and application. So again, really appreciate this opportunity to share this information with you, and would love to have feedback and your engagement on the work that we've conducted. So Dave, I'll turn it to you.
Okay, see if I can advance the slide here. There we go. Hello everyone, I'm Dave Anderson of PNNL. Thank you today for the opportunity to share some of our ongoing research. Today I will review work that DOE has sponsored examining the question of U.S. electricity affordability. This includes how affordability is being defined and viewed in the DOE context. I'll briefly highlight some macroeconomic indicators of electricity affordability. Then I'll introduce where most of our efforts have been focused, metrics derived from customer cost burden. I'll review some of the data sources and calculation approach. And finally, I'll demo a map-based tool that illustrates the metrics spatially and highlight our future directions. Early on, we sought to define affordability differently than simply cost effectiveness. The emerging or foundational literature on electric grid architecture commissioned by DOE has recognized this, as they have indicated that electric service affordability must address the consumer's ability to pay for the service, not simply whether the service is economically efficient for the provider. As grid modernization activities progress, DOE would like to monitor their impact on affordability and their impact on the affordability of electric service to customers. This graphic illustrates what's been observed about the income distribution in the United States over the last 40+ years. In real terms, the tails of the distribution have been growing substantially. As the low end of the distribution has become larger, affordability has become a larger issue generally across housing, healthcare, and certainly the provision of essential services like electric utilities. DOE has been interested in the macro trend in the affordability of electric service. General electricity affordability is possible to review in macro measures like the components of gross domestic product. Customer affordability is necessarily tied to the household income of the customer. At the macro level, in real terms, household incomes are rising, as evidenced by the green line in the chart. This is the trend despite what we saw in the previous chart, as growth in households having higher incomes is outpacing the growth in households having lower incomes. The blue line indicates that total spending on residential electric service is increasing in real terms, which would be expected as the number of households continues to grow. Per household, however, the red line indicates that on average, expenditures for electric service are flat to declining. And finally, the purple line suggests that as a share of personal income, electricity service is clearly declining in real terms, as expenditures on other goods and services continue to increase with increasing incomes. At the macro level, the indication is that electricity service is becoming more affordable. Of course, the story is more nuanced than that, as we will highlight. The focus of the DOE GMLC effort has been to dive deeper into metrics that derive from customer cost burden. Cost burden is the proportion of income or revenue spent on electricity service. Cost burden facing all customers is important to understand, but we have focused our initial efforts on the residential sector simply based on the availability of data to enable the calculations. The question of affordable versus unaffordable electricity service is determined by comparing the cost burden faced by a household to a threshold value to determine the gap between the two. The threshold value indicates the proportion of the household's income that should be allotted or budgeted for electricity service, as deemed by some authority, such as a PUC or as suggested by statistical evidence. This threshold value is not universal, and a range of values is possible, depending on jurisdictions, service areas, and definitions or calculation approaches. In this equation, if the gap is greater than 1, electricity is unaffordable. A general rule of thumb suggests that 3% is a valid value to use as a threshold. This is derived from the housing literature, which suggests housing costs should be no more than 30% of household income, and that household energy costs should be no more than 20% of that 30%, resulting in 6%. If energy costs are generally split between electricity and gas, then 3% would be the threshold for electricity. Of course, in the case of all electric homes, this value would be the full 6%. The tool I will demo is able to use a range of threshold values. The literature offers several approaches to selecting threshold values. So there's many possible ways of doing this. The metrics PNNL has estimated are calculated using only public data sources. Ideally, we would have actual customer bills matched with the customer's household income to get the most accurate reflection of the cost burden. But in the absence of that, public data are used. Household income comes from the 16-bin distribution available in the American Community Survey update produced by the Census Bureau each year. EIA Form 861 provides the monthly data by utility for revenue, kilowatt-hour sales, and the numbers of customers by class. It also provides service territory geographic definitions at the county level. The Form 861 data also provide monthly state-level totals from which averages are calculated and applied to those counties for which no utility data are supplied. The use of monthly data overcomes the issue of masking some households with unaffordable electricity costs, which occurs when using annual data. Annual averages tend to miss cases where, in the high-cost months, like summer and winter, some additional households cross the threshold into unaffordable costs. The metrics are calculated spatially at the state and county levels for the whole country. This can be easily extended to the census block group level for custom territories. For each income bin, we are calculating the number and percentage of households facing unaffordable electricity within each month of the year. We also calculate the effective rate being paid by month at the state level by dividing revenue by kilowatt-hour sales. We calculate the aggregate cost of electricity per customer by dividing revenue by the number of customers. The results are implemented using state and county choropleth maps within Excel, which I will demo in a few seconds. In the background, the data tables housing all the metric values are queried based on menu selections and some VBA code that recolors the map accordingly. We're looking for feedback on the usefulness of the tool and the information it provides. And the plan in the next few months is to webify this tool. But for now, the Excel tool is available to play with, and feedback would be appreciated. We plan to make the tool available through the CISA website until it's posted on the GMLC website. So I'm going to switch over to the tool here and see if I can do that seamlessly. Well, let's go back.
If you press escape, there you go.
Yeah, I'm getting there. Okay. So the tool is a spreadsheet with 3 tabs. It has an initial introductory tab that gives you some background information available in an embedded PDF file. And that also includes our request to utilities that I will talk about a little bit later. A little bit of introduction. To run the tool using Excel, of course, you would need to enable the macro settings in Excel. Sometimes the basic installation of Excel is locked down and this is not available, so we just point you to the fact that you need to enable these settings to enable the tool. So I'm switching over into the state map tab now. There we go. So as you can see, it's a map sitting in Excel, and it's got some titles that tell you which metric we're looking at and a timestamp. So if you wanted to conduct your own analysis, you could kind of freeze frame things and look at different scenarios. But what this map is doing is showing you, for example, this map is displaying the affordability gap metric for July of 2016 based on the data sources that I've been reviewing. And you can pick alternative metrics to look at. So you can look at any year of 2016, and you can look at the gap. Let's pick, just to show you how it changes. If we set our threshold for 3% and we pick January of 2016, the state map will update. And you get an idea here in the legend of what the colors mean. And the legends are recalculated on the fly depending on the metric. And then there's, if you have a different color preference, there's any number of color preferences you could select. You could look at something in a single color. Something else, some other metrics that we show at the state level, besides the gap metric, we show the average cost burdens by month as well. So we could look at July for that, and you can see how the southern part of the country has under cooling loads are using much more electricity and paying much more for electricity during the summer months, where a place like Washington State and the north, of course, would have lower costs for during the cooling season. As you roll over any one of the states or counties, when I show you the counties, you can see it's showing you the actual value. Hopefully that comes through on the webinar. You can see that little tooltip or pop-up box that gives you the information that's being displayed. Moving over to the county map, basically we have the same information displayed at the county level throughout the entire country. So this particular map comes up as showing the average residential electric cost burden for July of 2016. We can take a peek at a winter month like January and see how the map changes. Let's see, this also shows you all the, as I was mentioning before, we calculate for several different threshold values what the affordability gap is in any given month. So let's take a look at a shoulder month like April, and we'll look at 3% first. And it shows you, so that it ranges from basically 5.3% of the households having unaffordable electricity costs up to as many as 80.6, depending on the county. And of course, this is a function also not just of the usage of electricity, but also of the income of the income distribution within each of these counties. So some of these very poor counties, like McCreary County in Kentucky, I think is the one county with the greatest number of unaffordable households in April of 2016 at the 3% level. You can see how this would change if we tighten the threshold down to 2%. Many more counties would flag as having substantially unaffordable electricity. Greater than 50% of the households would have unaffordable electricity. If you loosen the threshold up to, let's say, as high as 6%, obviously you should see a much greener looking map where fewer and fewer households are facing unaffordable electricity costs. Let's see, we also show the highest month electricity cost burden. I'm not sure how useful some of these are, and as you review this and play with it, you may determine many different possible combinations or metrics that you would like to see, and that's exactly what we're sort of asking for. I'm just trying to give you a little bit of a flavor of the types of metrics that are possible to display using the methodology that we've developed. So I'm going to flip back into the presentation now. Maybe. There are some caveats that go with any kind of analysis, and these need to be kept in mind, although I'm not sure how limiting they really are. GMLC is concerned only with electricity affordability, so I've been trying to sort of reiterate that as I've gone through. Thus, no accounting is made for something like gas heating or self-generated electricity. In places with high penetration of gas heating, expenditures for electricity are understandably much lower than in places with all electric heating. This is simply an observation and not viewed as a limitation when considering electricity affordability. Also, the revenue data reported by EIA naturally reflect equal payment plan billings for that segment of residential customers. This also is not really a limitation, as revenues reflect the actual costs faced by customers in a given month, even though some costs are transferred from high usage months to low usage months. As I mentioned, the tool has an embedded PDF file on that front tab that includes a request to any potential utility partners. We would like to test our metric calculation approach by comparing the values estimated using public data with values for the same areas using anonymized billing data to see if the two data sources yield reasonably close results for a specific service area. We're also updating the documentation of our work to replace the documentation link that was provided in the webinar invite, and that should be available within a month or so. We hope to get a start on cracking a much tougher nut, doing similar metrics for the commercial and industrial sectors. And finally, as I've mentioned, we'll be webifying this tool to ease use and dissemination. And I guess at this point, I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
Great, thank you, Dave, and thanks, Monisha. That was great. Thanks for demoing that tool. So yeah, we'll move into Q&A, and I've already got some questions here. And if you've got other questions, please type them into the questions box, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. So my first question, Dave, is I know one of the things you're hoping to get in terms of feedback is potential applications for what you've done. But do you have any, how is this being used? How could it be used both by public entities, sort of clean energy advocates, low income advocates? Do you see it used by all those entities?
I think it can be used by any of those groups. I didn't take the time to share a use case that we did with some villages in Alaska, but we actually got some village level billing data that we were able to use and examine with the cooperation of another GMLC project, the implementation of a localized microgrid to offset the use of fuel oil generators that they're using up there to provide power in some of these very remote villages. In cooperation with some other folks here and some NREL folks, they were able to design a microgrid that ended up reducing costs to these villages, at least on paper. And so the natural use of these metrics is to take that reduction in cost and convert it into what that would imply for rates, and then examine how the change in rates actually reduces or changes the affordability of electricity as faced by different incomes. So it can be used in direct application of specific projects that are grid modernizing activities. It also sort of naturally has other uses of interest to PUCs, for example, who might be interested in knowing in general what the baseline affordability conditions are within their state. As I said, specific service territories can be identified down to the census block group level, and these approaches can be applied that way as well, to highlight or baseline what the current affordability scenario is within any geographic definition. And then as time goes on, you can track these metrics and view how they change.
Great, thanks, Dave. I know you said this, but it might be worth underscoring because I'm getting a few questions about where this tool is available. And so I just wanted to reiterate is we will post a link to download the mapping spreadsheet along with the recording of the webinar on CISA's website after the fact. But you also mentioned that you're hoping to webify it. Do you want to say a few more words about that?
Yeah, so for now, the tool is a proof of concept, and it's freely available, and always will be. It's just that we want to get to a point where we have it available as a web tool rather than a spreadsheet that you have to download and set up on your computer. So we appreciate CISA being willing to make it available through their website. Eventually, very soon, it'll be on the GMLC website, and we'll provide a link to that as well to this audience. And that's probably all I can say.
Great, thanks. We've got a couple questions about how bill assistance programs were taken into account when calculating the affordability gap. Did you make any assumptions about those? And just sort of specifically, does this index take into account any state or federal programs that help with customer bills? For example, California allows households below a certain income to have some bill assistance there.
Right. So the cost part of the equation is the revenue that is generated from the residential sector, and so that is basically a summation of all the payments that customers have made on their bills by month, as reported by the utilities to the Energy Information Administration. And so these numbers do reflect like I said, they do reflect equal payment plans, or any bill assistance is already embedded in the revenue numbers that are received from by the utilities, because that's a reflection of all the outlays of each individual customer. So whatever a customer is paying is what's reflected in the revenue portion of the equation. So the answer is yes, all of those programs are considered. They're just naturally embedded in the results. So if you see something that shows unaffordable, you know, a fraction of a particular county shows up as being, you know, 40% of the households are unaffordable, have unaffordable electricity, that reflects the fact that bill assistance has already been provided.
Great, thanks, Dave. Here's a question just about the functionality. Can you reduce the tool to for the nation down to the state or county level? In other words, so it's just showing that particular state or county in a bigger graphically?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I would, I mean, we're sort of limited on how much more development we can put into the tool, but it's a very simple process to simply identify a different graphic, create a different tab. As I mentioned, we can look at a single county, for example, or a group of counties at the census block group level. We can look at an individual state full of its counties. Yes, absolutely is the answer to that question.
Great, thanks. What do you plan to add to the tool in the next month other than webifying it? Are there certain elements that you can share that you're going to add to it in terms of functionality?
The only thing I would do is if there are if there's particular energy around additional metrics, it may be possible to add a few more metrics. Right now, there's like 75 to 90 metrics in that menu that can be selected, but there may be something that this audience sees as a glaring need, and we would possibly be able to add that as well.
Thanks. Here's a question. How can the tool be used for some sort of what-if analyses, more hypothetical? Would there be a way to use it for estimating the impact of sort of more renewables, more renewably sourced electricity, and what that would do to affordability in particular regions? Or is that not something that's you know, that this will be able to do?
Yeah, this is not specifically designed for that kind of scenario analysis. This is more of an information tool. As far as I know, this information isn't really disseminated this way anywhere else. And so the idea here is simply to make the users of the tool aware of the conditions around the country or within a state. It's not currently set up to sort of lay out an analysis where, okay, let's look at a modernization activity and see what the impact is. It's simply more of an informational tool. And like I said, what we might do is we could add years to this tool so that you could see indices of change in affordability over time. That would probably be the smartest use of this type of tool, is to view sort of the trend information as things have changed over time.
Great, thanks. We got a couple questions about whether you're capturing data for Puerto Rico. There's some parallel efforts, it sounds like, being done for Puerto Rico, prsolarmap.com, and just wondered if you're doing anything for Puerto Rico.
Nope, this is simply the 50 states.
Gotcha. A question about whether the data will be available so people can manipulate it and make tables and charts that to sort of add on to the map In other words, is sort of the data underlying this. I mean, I know you shared some of it's from different sources that are publicly available, but is that a possibility?
So the spreadsheet is fairly locked down, but all of the data is in it. And so if you're enterprising, you can find it and get it. But I'd like to keep the focus on the display of the information. When we officially put this on the GMLC website, I'm sure that we'll make the data much more transparent and available. It is in there. The tabs where the data is housed are hidden, but it is in there. Recognize that these are, these are simply result tables from a fairly complex, detailed spreadsheet analysis, and we're trying to, I guess, optimize or make more efficient the calculation approach so it can be implemented sort of on the fly on the web. But that's sort of that's our work in progress. But the actual data values that you see on the map are all in tables that are embedded in the spreadsheet. If people have specific questions about that, I'm happy to talk, or we can email or whatever you'd like to do and make that data available. But I guess I would request that let's wait until we've formally placed the tool on the GMLC website, and we'll at that time we'll open those tabs and make that data available.
Great, thanks. Do you think this tool could be used by state legislators and policymakers and energy officials to craft policy to address low and moderate income customer challenges with high electricity bills?
Certainly, in concert with all the other information at their disposal. Yes, I think that's a natural use of it. It highlights pretty clearly, especially the more you drill in geographically. It highlights, where the pockets of unaffordable electricity service are. Those won't be too shocking to people that are already familiar with their service areas, the socioeconomic status in the service areas that they care about. So, but yes, certainly as a supplement with everything else that's used in policy formulation.
Thanks. Here's a question about and I think we know the answer to this since it's locked on a monthly basis, but were costs measured on an average basis? That is not during the summer when usage is higher, also assuming no electric heat, question mark?
Right, so the EIA data is published for each month. Okay, so each of the metrics is calculated for each month based on that month's usage and that month's revenue and that month's number of customers for each utility that reports to EIA. So hopefully that answers the question. But we recognize when we initially started out, we were looking at this as an annual tool, and quickly realized that that we would need to add the monthly capability because we were missing folks that would be caught in the averages, if you will. And so these metrics are rolled up from each individual income bin in the 16 bin income distribution of each individual geography that is shown on the map. So hopefully that answers.
Thanks, that was helpful. Yeah, another question, is the measurement tool available by census blocks, or is the county level the smallest it'll go? Could you go to the municipal level, or is county really as sort of the granularity that you've got?
So the tool is limited simply by the census data, and the census data go down to the census block group, and so that's the finest resolution that we could illustrate. In the report that was published last year on our initial efforts here, and that's about to be updated here in the next month, we illustrate an example using SMUD, the Sacramento Municipal Utility District, because it's a single county service area, and we display a map in that document that was done at the census block group level. And that's possible to do because the income data is available for that full income distribution down to that level. So yes, anything that census reports the income distribution for, we can do a map tool for.
Thanks. Here's a question. Can you talk about the processes and challenges of extending the affordability analysis to commercial and industrial sectors?
Excellent question. That's really what is starting to weigh on my mind. The challenges are that you know, the residential, for example, residential market or residential sector is basically dealing with premises, right? You know, so apartments and houses, and relatively speaking, compared to businesses and industrial plants, it's pretty homogeneous. And so it's much easier to examine something that deals with residents who are people that are counted by the census in great detail. That is not possible with, or at least very easily, with the statistical information that's available on businesses. And so there's a myriad of challenges. You know, some businesses are very electricity intensive, and a large portion of their costs necessarily would be spent on electricity. Others are mom and pop businesses who, you know, electricity is possibly a small fraction of their effort, but they all these businesses may be subject to the same commercial rate structure. It may be counted as part of the same commercial sector consumption. And so we have to develop a way, and that's sort of what my task is at the moment, is to try and develop a way to tease these things out of the available data. And then, you know, further separate the industrial sector from the commercial sector as well, from using the business statistics that are available on establishment size, revenue size, and whatever metric we can get to provide us the most amount of resolution into business sectors, so that we can try to segment like businesses as best we can, and then try to figure out how you do a cost burden for those like business types. So it's a significant challenge, and the goal that we have this year is to come up with a methodology to do that. And so there'll be more to come on that.
Thanks. Does the EIA data and your map include tribal data?
The EIA data includes anyone who is a customer of utilities. So it would be very possible. In fact, that's how we did this for Alaska. Is we used these villages are typically single tribe villages, and we used the tribal income information from the census to do the Alaska case that we did. So the answer is yes, we can do that, but the EIA data is not specific to specific tribal entities that I'm aware of. So we would have to have a different source potentially to get at what a specific tribe is spending on electricity. We would know their incomes very easily, but hard to tease out their expenditures on electricity from the public data that EIA has.
Thanks. Do you or could you break out the household costs by race or by age with the census data?
That would be difficult simply because the utility data is not supplied that way. So the short answer is no. I mean, we could try to extend. You know, I'm just going to say no. It would not be very easy. Mainly because EIA just simply doesn't collect or report the data that way.
Okay, thanks. Here's a question. On the census block group question and answer, you get the income, quote unquote, at that level, but the EIA data on electricity bills are still available only at the state level, right? That is, are you using the state data for the numerator and the consensus block group data for the denominator?
No, so EIA also publishes the county. One of the components of the Form 861 data package is the service area definitions by county for each reporting utility. And so we would be using EIA's county level data and averaging that over the census block groups within that county. It's not perfect, but it can be done, and just highlights the reasoning behind a test that we're trying to do to figure out if public data actually can match up with actual billing data. We're hoping to get a partner that would sort of see the value in doing that and want to cooperate by sharing some data. But yeah, we are able to go from the county level, or what we're doing if we do this at the census block group level, we would be taking county level EIA data and sharing that out across the census block groups based on the income distributions of each block group.
Great. In one of your earlier answers to a question on census block group data, you mentioned the 16 bins in the census. Can you elaborate?
So there's a table in the census results that provides the number of households within each bin of income across 16 bins. So it starts at 0 to like $10,000 and it goes up to 200,000 plus, and there are 16 bins between those income classifications in which census estimates the number of households within each of those bins. And that is the crux of the income portion of the calculations that we do. It's table number B19001, I believe.
Okay. You mentioned trends and you showed something from 2016. Does the filtering, the drop-down menu allow selecting specific time periods, and what time range does the data cover? And will it be updated moving forward?
Excellent question. We're showing data for 2016 in the tool currently. There are, on the state tab, there are indices that are based on a base year of 2006. So you can look at, as of 2016, you can see what the change has been in residential rates, commercial rates, and industrial rates. I didn't show that in the demo, but I suppose I could do that. There is no specific trend information in here yet. In order to do that, we would need to do the analysis for the preceding years, and that's it's not a minor amount of analysis work to do that. And so, you know, so for that reason, it's kind of hard to show the trend information right now. It certainly could be built in. The reason we're not any more recent than 2016, as you might be aware, you know, the census data are only available now for 2016. That's annually updated. It's a lot better than it used to be, but the 2017 income data from the census won't be available for a while. So we're using the most recent data that we have. EIA actually has more recent data on, they have most of 2017, maybe even some of 2018 monthly data available, but we don't have the income data to match it. So we're limited to using 2016. That's the most recent year. If you think, Nate, if you think it's worth it, I can show a couple of the trend indice metrics using the state math. But otherwise, we can leave it at that.
Let me ask you a couple other questions, and if we have time, we can do that in just a bit. I wondered if you could, we got another question about the bill assistance data, and I know you said sort of that was baked into the analysis. Can you explain how that's embedded and how you received that bill assistance data?
Right, so it's not called out separately. So so what EIA is reporting is the total revenue received by the residential customer class. Okay, so if you're on bill assistance, whatever you're paying, whatever assisted amount you have to pay, is already factored in. That is part of the revenue that's received by the utility. So the fact that it was discounted to you as a customer is irrelevant, because what you're paying is what counts as revenue for the utility. So they've already, that's why I'm saying it's sort of already accounted for. Same with the equal payment plans. You know, if you're making equal payments over the year, that is simply that equal payment amount is what counts for the revenue received by the utility in that month. And so we don't do any, there's no attempts made to try and tease out how much was assistance or how much was equal payment, because it's already the source of revenue. Whatever the customer pays is the revenue that's counted by the utility and reported to EIA.
Thank you. A couple questions. People have feedback or very specific questions and wondered what's the best avenue for getting the feedback and input on the tool to you.
It'd be great. I'd love to receive your feedback by email. That would be the best way. Should I provide a email address, I guess?
Yeah, let's say if you're open to it, we will provide, you know, when we post the webinar recording along with the link, we'll provide contact information if folks do want to follow up with you directly. Is that okay?
That would be ideal.
Very good. Very good.
I want everyone to understand that we're very much interested in receiving the feedback. So thank you very much.
Great. Well, we're getting close to the hour mark here, and we do have some additional questions. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to get to all of them. I'll just ask one more question here before we close out. For the census data, do you use 5-year estimates or 1-year estimates?
We use the 5-year estimates. My understanding is that the 1-year estimates don't go down to the census block group. At least they didn't used to. And so I think only the 5-year estimates do that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I don't feel like that's a limitation. You know, ideally the 1-year estimates would go down that far geographically, but I don't believe they do.
Okay, well, we'll call it a wrap there since we're basically reached the top of the hour here. I want to thank you again, Dave and Monisha too, for developing and sharing the affordability metrics mapping tool with us, and for your presentation today. It was great, and thanks to our audience for tuning in. As I said, we will post a link to download the tool that was displayed, as well as a recording of the webinar on the CISA website afterwards, and we'll also include contact information for Dave in case there's additional follow-up that you'd like to do specifically. So I will, before closing out here, I just want to turn it back over to Samantha to tell you about some of CISA's upcoming webinars and to close out.
Great, thanks, Nate. So we do have a bunch of webinars coming up this summer. On the screen, you'll see just the ones that we have listed in the next month. There are many more coming up after that, but next up is one next week, June 26th, on the future of electrification and what it means for clean energy. And then we have a webinar as part of our Resilient Power series, Resilient Power in Practice, Lessons Learned from the Field. And then we've got the first in our State Leadership in Clean Energy Awards webinar series that's featuring programs from New York and Oregon. And then mid-July, we've got a webinar also related to solar on using solar to reduce peak loads, evaluating Rhode Island's distributed solar pilot. And Nate is going to be hosting that one as well. So if you're interested in any of these webinars, they're all free. You can sign up at cisa.org/webinars, and we'll also include some links to sign up in the follow-up email that you'll be getting today. So hope to see you at some of those webinars. Thank you for joining us for this one today, and we'll hope to see you at the next one. Bye, everybody.